The alarm klaxon pierced through the foreigning air at Fort Bragg's live fire training range, cutting through the rhythmic crack of rifle fire like a knife through silk. Ashley Walker pushed through the safety barrier, with her clipboard clutched against her chest, her small frame dwarfed by the massive expanse of the tactical training ground. 50 special operations soldiers scattered across various training stations turned their heads in unison, their movements sharp and predatory, like wolves sensing an intruder in their territory. Captain Blake Mitchell rose from his command position with the explosive force of a man whose authority had just been challenged. Standing at 6 feet with the distinctive Ranger tab tattoo visible on his forearm, he embodied everything the elite military represented: power, precision, and an absolute intolerance for anything that disrupted his perfectly orchestrated training environment. His boots struck the gravel with deliberate force as he crossed the 30 yards between them, each step broadcasting his displeasure. "What the hell are you doing on my training field?" Blake's voice carried across the entire range, designed to be heard over gunfire and chaos. The question wasn't really a question, it was an accusation wrapped in military authority. Ashley stood frozen, the clipboard trembling slightly in her grip. At 5'6" and maybe 120 pounds in her administrative uniform, she looked like a sparrow that had accidentally flown into an eagle's nest. Her brown hair was pulled back in a regulation bun that somehow made her look even younger than her 28 years. I need to verify the training ammunition count, sir," Ashley said quietly, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere near Blake's boots. "Supply requisition for next week's joint exercise." Blake closed the distance between them with 2 more strides, his presence filling the space like a physical force. "This is a Tier 1 tactical training area, not a playground for paper pushers." He snatched the clipboard from her hands with enough force to make her stumble slightly, then threw it to the ground where it clattered against the gravel. "Get off my field, now!" Around them, Rangers and Special Forces operators watched with varying degrees of amusement. Someone let out a low whistle of mockery. A younger Ranger near the weapons station actually laughed out loud, the sound sharp and cruel in the morning air. Ashley bent down to retrieve her clipboard, her shoulders trembling slightly as she gathered the scattered papers. But as she leaned forward, her administrative jacket shifted, revealing for just a moment a thin line of scar tissue along her collar, a detail that went unnoticed by everyone except one figure standing in the shadows of the observation tower. Ashley straightened, papers clutched messily against the clipboard, and turned to leave without another word. Her exit should have been the end of it, a minor disruption in the day's training schedule, a story the Rangers would tell later over beers about the time some desk jockey wandered onto their field. But Blake wasn't finished. "Hold on," he called out, his tone shifting from anger to something more calculated. "You're Walker from Supply, right? The one who keeps requesting access to restricted training areas?" Ashley stopped, but didn't turn around. "Yes, sir. I'm just trying to do my job accurately." "Your job," Blake said, emphasizing the word like it tasted bitter, "is to count boxes in a warehouse, not interfere with warrior training. You want to observe real soldiers? There's a recruitment video playing in the visitor center." The laughter from the gathered soldiers was louder this time, more confident. They smelled blood in the water, and Blake was giving them permission to circle. Ashley's head dropped slightly, her grip on the clipboard tightening until her knuckles went white. She took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside, then walked away with measured steps, neither rushing nor lingering. As she reached the edge of the training field, she heard Blake address his men. "That's why we maintain strict access protocols. We can't have civilians thinking they belong in our world, just because they wear a uniform." Ashley kept walking, but something in her step had changed, a subtle shift from retreat to strategic withdrawal that only trained eyes would recognize. She headed toward the weapons storage facility, a massive hangar-like structure that housed everything from small arms to heavy ordnance. It was technically within her jurisdiction for inventory purposes, though most supply clerks did their counts from manifests in the comfort of air-conditioned offices. The morning sun climbed higher as Ashley entered the weapons facility, the temperature already pushing past 75 degrees, despite it being only 0730 hours. The familiar smell of gun oil and metal filled her nostrils as she moved between the racks of M4 carbines and heavier weapons systems. She pulled out her inventory sheets and began the methodical process of visual confirmation, checking serial numbers against her list. She had been working for less than 2 minutes when footsteps echoed through the facility. Sergeant Connor Hayes appeared around a rack of weapons, his massive frame blocking most of the overhead lighting. Connor was the type of soldier who looked like he'd been carved from granite. 6'3", 220 pounds of muscle, with scarred knuckles that spoke of too many bar fights and not enough self-control. Well, well, Connor drawled, his voice carrying the lazy confidence of a predator that knew its prey couldn't escape. The little office mouse is playing with the big boy toys. Ashley didn't look up from her clipboard. Just doing inventory, Sergeant. Connor moved closer, deliberately invading her personal space. You know what your problem is, Walker? You think that uniform makes you one of us. But there's soldiers, and then there's people who just wear the costume. He reached past her to grab an M4 from the rack, his arm brushing against her shoulder with calculated aggression. Ashley stepped aside smoothly, the movement so fluid it seemed almost accidental. Connor noticed, though, his eyes narrowing slightly. You scared of me, office girl? No, Sergeant, Ashley replied, her voice steady but quiet. Just trying to maintain professional distance. Connor laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the metal walls. Professional distance? That's rich. You wouldn't last 5 minutes in a real combat situation. Probably piss yourself at the first sound of gunfire. Ashley's hand had moved to the next weapon on the rack, her fingers running along its surface in what looked like a simple inventory check. But the way her thumb found the selector switch, the way her index finger indexed along the trigger guard without actually entering it, these were movements of practiced familiarity, muscle memory so ingrained it happened without conscious thought. Connor was about to say something else when Master Sergeant Ethan Cross entered the facility. Where Connor was all brute force, Ethan was precision, lean, sharp-featured, with the kind of eyes that noticed everything and forgot nothing. He'd been Special Forces for 12 years, with deployments nobody talked about in places that didn't officially exist. Having fun with the supply clerk, Connor? Ethan asked, though his attention was entirely on Ashley. Just explaining the difference between real soldiers and pretenders, Connor replied, stepping back slightly. Even he knew better than to push too hard when Ethan was around. Ethan walked over to the weapon Ashley had just been examining. You know what this is, Walker? An M4 carbine, Ashley responded without hesitation. Anyone can read a label, but do you know what makes it different from the M4A1? Ashley paused, and for a moment something flickered across her face, a calculation of how much to reveal. The M4 has a 3-round burst, while the A1 is fully automatic. The rail system is also different, and the A1 has an ambidextrous safety selector. The facility went quiet. That wasn't common knowledge, not the kind of thing a supply clerk would typically know. Ethan's eyes sharpened, studying Ashley with renewed interest. You read that in a manual somewhere? Something like that, Ashley said, returning to her inventory. But Ethan wasn't done. He pulled a partially disassembled pistol from a maintenance table. Since you're so knowledgeable, maybe you can tell Connor here what's wrong with this Glock 19. Ashley glanced at the weapon for less than 2 seconds. The recoil spring is installed backward, and someone mixed up the trigger housing pin with the locking block pin. It would fail to cycle properly, probably jam on the second round. Connor's mockery died on his lips. Ethan set the pistol down slowly, his expression unreadable. That's very specific knowledge for someone who counts boxes. I like to understand what I'm inventorying, Ashley said simply, making another mark on her clipboard. Makes me better at my job. Before we continue this story of hidden warriors and shattered assumptions, tell us where you are watching from today. Your support helps us share these incredible military stories that deserve to be remembered. Hit that subscribe button if you believe true strength often comes in unexpected packages. The tension in the weapons facility had shifted into something different, not quite respect, but a wary curiosity. Ethan and Connor exchanged glances, a silent communication between soldiers who'd just recognized something unexpected. But before either could pursue their questions, more footsteps echoed through the facility. Staff Sergeant Marcus Stone appeared with 2 other Rangers, their arrival feeling less like coincidence and more like reinforcements being called in. Marcus was the kind of soldier who enjoyed his power a little too much, the type who had peaked in basic training and never quite gotten over it. His eyes immediately found Ashley, and his lips curved into a predatory smile. Boys telling war stories to the secretary? Marcus asked, his tone dripping with false friendliness. Careful, she might get confused and think she's actually important. The 2 Rangers with him laughed on cue. Ashley recognized them. Private First Class Tyler Adams and Specialist David Kim, both young enough to still think cruelty was the same as strength. They spread out slightly, unconsciously forming a semicircle around Ashley, cutting off her easy exits. "We were just discussing weapons knowledge," Ethan said carefully, watching the dynamics shift. "Weapons knowledge?" Marcus scoffed. "What's next, teaching her hand-to-hand combat? Maybe she wants to learn breach and clear tactics too." He stepped closer to Ashley, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "You know what your problem is, Walker? You're playing dress-up in a world you don't belong in. This uniform, these weapons, this whole environment, it's not for people like you." "People like me?" Ashley asked, her voice still quiet, but carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. "Weak people, soft people, people who think watching action movies makes them warriors." Marcus reached out and flicked the corner of her clipboard. "People who should stick to filing reports and making coffee, while real soldiers do the actual work." Ashley's stance had shifted almost imperceptibly, her weight redistributing in a way that would allow for rapid movement in any direction. It was subtle, so subtle that only Ethan noticed, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the positioning. "I don't make coffee," Ashley said simply. "No? Well, maybe you should start. At least then you'd be useful for something." The insult hung in the air like a challenge. Connor laughed, encouraging Marcus to continue. Tyler and David were recording on their phones now, hoping to capture something worth sharing later. The entire dynamic had devolved from professional harassment to something more primitive, pack behavior, with Ashley as the designated prey. But prey didn't usually stand their ground the way Ashley was. Despite being surrounded by soldiers who each outweighed her by at least 80 pounds, she hadn't stepped back, hadn't shown fear, hadn't given them the reaction they were hunting for. Lieutenant Liam Harper appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with a quick glance. Liam was different from the others, older, quieter, with the kind of thousand-yard stare that came from too many deployments and too many friends who didn't come home. He didn't participate in the games younger soldiers played. "There a problem here?" Liam asked, his question directed at no one in particular. "No problem, LT," Marcus replied quickly, "just explaining operational security to the supply clerk, making sure she understands which areas are off-limits to non-combat personnel." Liam's gaze moved to Ashley, noting her controlled posture and the careful way she was breathing, slow, measured breaths designed to maintain calm under stress. "Walker, you finished with your inventory?" "Almost, sir," Ashley replied. "Just need to check the heavy weapons section." "Then get to it. The rest of you, don't you have training to complete?" The group dispersed reluctantly, like school bullies being broken up by a teacher. Marcus shot Ashley one last look that promised this wasn't over, while Connor cracked his knuckles in what he probably thought was an intimidating gesture. Ethan lingered a moment longer, still studying Ashley with those sharp eyes, before following the others out. Liam waited until they were gone, then approached Ashley. "You all right?" "I'm fine, sir, thank you." "They give you a lot of trouble?" Ashley shrugged slightly. "Nothing I can't handle." Liam studied her for a moment. "You know, most supply clerks would have filed a complaint by now, or requested a transfer, or at least shown some kind of emotional response to that level of harassment. I'm not most supply clerks, sir." "No," Liam said slowly, "you're not. That's what's interesting." He left without another word, leaving Ashley alone in the weapons facility. She stood there for a moment, her shoulders finally relaxing slightly, though her alertness never decreased. She moved to the heavy weapons section, running her inventory checks with mechanical precision, but her mind was elsewhere. As she checked serial numbers on the mounted weapons systems, her hands moved with familiar ease around the machinery of war. The M250 caliber machine gun's butterfly trigger, the Mark 19 grenade launcher's feed system. Her fingers knew these weapons intimately, though she was careful not to let that knowledge show too obviously. The morning progressed with relative calm after the confrontation in the weapons facility. Ashley completed her inventory and returned to the supply office, a small building adjacent to the main training complex. The office was her sanctuary of sorts, organized, quiet, and blissfully free of testosterone-fueled aggression. She had just settled at her desk when her computer chimed with a new email. The sender made her freeze. Colonel Mason Brooks, base commander. The subject line was simple: "Inventory discrepancy meeting, 1300 hours." Ashley stared at the email for a long moment. Colonel Brooks didn't involve himself in supply matters unless something was seriously wrong, or unless someone had complained about her presence on the training field that morning. She opened the email, finding only a brief message confirming the meeting time and location, the commander's conference room in the headquarters building. The next few hours passed slowly. Ashley completed her paperwork, filed her reports, and tried to ignore the knot of tension forming in her stomach. She'd been so careful for the past 18 months, maintaining her cover as a simple supply clerk, never revealing more than necessary, but this morning's events had created ripples, and ripples had a way of becoming waves. At 12:45, Ashley made her way to the headquarters building. The structure was imposing, all concrete and authority, designed to remind everyone who entered exactly where the power resided. She checked in with the secretary, who gave her a look that might have been sympathy or might have been curiosity, then took a seat in the waiting area. At exactly 1300 hours, the conference room door opened. "Walker, come in," Colonel Brooks called out. Ashley entered to find not just Colonel Brooks, but also Captain Blake Mitchell and, surprisingly, Major Alexander Price from Base Intelligence. The three men sat on one side of the conference table, creating an intimidating tribunal effect. Ashley took the single chair on the opposite side, her posture perfect despite the obvious power imbalance. Colonel Brooks was in his early 50s, with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that came from decades of military service. He studied Ashley with dark eyes that missed nothing, taking in every detail from her pressed uniform to the controlled way she placed her hands on the table. "Ms. Walker," Brooks began, his use of the civilian title deliberate, "we've had some concerns raised about your conduct this morning." "My conduct, sir?" Ashley kept her voice neutral. Blake leaned forward, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. "You entered a restricted training area without authorization, disrupted an active exercise, and then proceeded to demonstrate knowledge of weapons systems that goes well beyond your job requirements." "I had authorization to conduct inventory checks, sir. The paperwork was filed last week." "For the storage facilities," Blake countered. "Not for active training areas. You had no business being on that field." Major Price hadn't spoken yet, but Ashley noticed he had a tablet in front of him, and occasionally his eyes would flick down to it as if checking something. The intelligence officer was a mystery, mid-40s, unremarkable appearance, but with the kind of stillness that suggested he was always watching, always calculating. "Tell me, Walker," Colonel Brooks said, leaning back in his chair, "where did you serve before coming to Fort Bragg?" "It's in my file, sir. Fort Campbell for basic administration training, then Fort Lee for supply specialist school." "No deployments?" "No, sir." "No combat experience?" "No, sir." Major Price finally spoke, his voice soft but somehow more dangerous for it. "Then how do you explain your extensive knowledge of weapons systems? The difference between M4 variants isn't something they teach in supply school." Ashley had prepared for this question months ago. "I believe in being thorough, sir. Understanding what I'm inventorying helps me do my job better. I read technical manuals in my spare time." "Technical manuals," Price repeated, his tone suggesting he didn't believe a word. "And I suppose technical manuals taught you how to identify installation errors in a Glock 19 with a 2-second glance?" "I have a good eye for detail, sir." Blake's fist hit the table, not hard enough to be truly aggressive, but enough to show his frustration. "This is ridiculous. She's obviously more than just a supply clerk. Nobody develops that kind of knowledge from reading manuals." "Captain Mitchell has a point," Brooks said, his eyes never leaving Ashley's face. "Your knowledge base suggests practical experience, not theoretical study. Care to explain?" Ashley remained silent for a moment, calculating risks and possibilities. Then she spoke carefully. "With respect, sir, I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm a supply specialist with an interest in understanding my inventory. If that's somehow a problem, I can limit my studies to basic identification only." Price typed something on his tablet, then frowned at the screen. "Interesting," he murmured. "What's interesting, Major?" Brooks asked. "I'm running a deeper background check on Ms. Walker. Standard records show exactly what she claimed. Basic training, supply school, assignment here. But when I try to dig deeper, to access more detailed records," he turned the tablet toward Brooks, "I hit classification walls." The room went very quiet. Classification walls meant someone had deliberately restricted access to Ashley's information, and that someone had significant authority to do so. Brooks studied the screen, his expression growing more serious. "What level?" "Level 5, sir. I don't have clearance to break through it, and neither do you. Level 5 classification was reserved for the most sensitive operations and personnel. It was the kind of classification that covered black ops, deep cover agents, and military activities that officially never happened." The three men looked at Ashley with new eyes, reassessing everything they thought if they knew about the quiet supply clerk. "Who are you?" Blake asked, his earlier anger replaced by something closer to wariness. "I'm Specialist Ashley Walker, Supply Logistics, Fort Bragg," Ashley replied, her voice steady. "My job is inventory and requisition support for training operations." "Don't play games," Brooks said sharply. "Nobody gets level 5 classification for counting boxes. You're either intelligence, special operations, or something else entirely. Which is it? I'm not authorized to discuss anything beyond my current assignment, sir." The non-answer was itself an answer. Ashley was confirming that there was something to hide while legally unable to reveal it. The dynamic in the room had shifted completely. She was no longer a subordinate being disciplined, but a mystery that needed solving. Major Price stood up abruptly. "Colonel, I need to make some calls. There are channels for this kind of situation, but they're going to take time." "Do it," Brooks ordered. Then he turned back to Ashley. "In the meantime, you're restricted from all training areas. You'll perform your duties from the supply office only. No field work, no inventory checks that require entering restricted zones. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Dismissed." Ashley stood, saluted properly, and left the room. As soon as the door closed behind her, she heard Brooks address the others. "I want eyes on her at all times. Something's not right here, and I don't like mysteries on my base." The next morning arrived with unusual tension hanging over Fort Bragg. Word had spread through the mysterious military grapevine that something was off about the supply clerk, though nobody knew exactly what. Theories ranged from the plausible, she was military intelligence conducting an investigation, to the absurd, she was a foreign spy who'd infiltrated the base. Ashley arrived at 0600 hours, earlier than usual, hoping to complete her work before the daily harassment began. She'd barely settled at her desk when her phone rang. The caller ID showed the base medical facility. "Supply, Walker speaking." "Ms. Walker, this is Captain Jade Williams at Medical. We have an emergency situation and need trauma supplies immediately. There's been a training accident on Range 7. Ashley was already moving, grabbing the emergency supply kit that was supposed to be delivered by vehicle. "How bad?" "Bad. We need the advanced trauma kit, the one with the hemostatic agents and chest seals. The ambulance is still 10 minutes out, but you're closer." Range 7 was only half a mile from the supply building, but it was firmly in the restricted area she'd been banned from. Ashley hesitated for exactly 1 second, then grabbed the 50-pound medical kit and started running. She reached the range in under 4 minutes, her lungs burning from the sprint with heavy equipment. The scene was chaos. A training explosion had gone wrong, leaving a young ranger, Corporal Noah Bennett, bleeding heavily from shrapnel wounds to his chest and abdomen. The on-site medics were doing their best, but they were combat lifesavers, not trauma surgeons. Ashley dropped to her knees beside Noah, her hands already moving to assess the wounds. The medic, Sergeant First Class Jackson Davis, looked up in surprise. "What are you doing here? This is—" "Shut up and hand me the chest seal," Ashley ordered, her entire demeanor transforming. Gone was the quiet, submissive supply clerk. In her place was someone who dealt with trauma before, someone who knew exactly what to do. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, packing wounds, applying pressure in exactly the right spots, using techniques that weren't taught in basic first aid courses. She worked with the speed and precision of someone who'd done this under fire, when seconds meant the difference between life and death. "Hold pressure here," she told Jackson, guiding his hands to a specific spot. "Don't let up even slightly. The subclavian artery is right beneath. If that clamp slips, he'll bleed out in 30 seconds. She moved to Noah's other wounds, using hemostatic gauze with the kind of technique that came from experience, not textbooks. Her movements were economical, efficient, almost beautiful in their precision. She was so focused she didn't notice the crowd gathering, didn't see Captain Blake Mitchell standing frozen at the edge of the scene. When Captain Williams arrived with the medical team, she found Noah stabilized, his bleeding controlled, his breathing steady. She looked at the field dressing with professional appreciation. "Who did this?" "She did," Jackson said, nodding toward Ashley. "I've never seen anything like it. She worked like a combat surgeon." Williams examined Ashley's work more closely. "This technique, this is special operations medical training. Where did you learn this?" Ashley was already backing away, the adrenaline fading, and leaving her aware of how badly she'd just blown her cover. I need to go." "He's stable now?" "Wait," Blake called out, but Ashley was already moving, walking quickly away from the scene. She made it about 50 yards before Colonel Brooks's voice boomed across the range. "Walker, stop right there!" Ashley froze. Brooks was approaching with Major Price and 2 military police officers. This was it. The moment her carefully constructed cover completely fell apart. "You were specifically banned from training areas," Brooks said as he reached her. "Yet, here you are. There was a medical emergency, sir. I had the supplies they needed. And the medical training, apparently," Price added. "Combat trauma medicine isn't something supply clerks typically know." Before Ashley could respond, another voice cut through the morning air. "Ashley?" Everyone turned to see a man approaching from the parking area. He was older, maybe early 60s, walking with a slight limp that suggested old injuries. He wore civilian clothes, but everything about him screamed military. The posture, the alertness, the way his eyes swept the scene for threats. Ashley's face went pale. "Command Sergeant Major Rivers?" The man approached the group, his eyes never leaving Ashley's face. "I heard you were here, but I had to see for myself. Ashley Walker, or should I say, Sergeant First Class Ashley Walker, Ghost Unit 7. The words hit like a thunderbolt. Ghost units were legend, myth, stories told in whispered conversations among special operations forces. Elite soldiers who operated so far in the black that their existence was officially denied. They handled missions too sensitive, too dangerous, or too politically complicated for acknowledged forces. Blake's face went through several expressions: shock, disbelief, and finally something approaching fear. "Ghost units don't exist." Rivers turned his weathered face toward Blake, and his expression was not kind. "Boy, there's a lot of things that don't exist until they save your worthless life. You remember that clusterfuck in Kandahar, 2019, when your Ranger Battalion got pinned down by those insurgents with the new Iranian rockets?" Blake nodded slowly, his face paling. That mission was classified, but everyone who had been there remembered it. 75 Rangers trapped, taking heavy casualties, with no air support available due to weather. You remember how those insurgent positions just started exploding? How their command structure fell apart? How suddenly there was a clear extraction route that hadn't been there 5 minutes before? Rivers continued. That was Ghost Unit 7. 6 operators who infiltrated those mountains and eliminated 17 high-value targets in 43 minutes. He looked back at Ashley. 6 went in, 1 came out, the only survivor of Operation Blackwater. The silence that followed was profound. Everyone was staring at Ashley now, seeing her completely differently. The small woman they had dismissed as weak, who they'd harassed and belittled, had been part of one of the most elite units in American military history. Major Price was typing frantically on his tablet. "I'm getting fragments now. Operation Blackwater, Yemen, not Kandahar." "Wait." His face went white. "The embassy extraction. That was you?" Ashley remained silent, her face expressionless. But Rivers wasn't done. "Show them," he said quietly. "They need to see." Ashley shook her head slightly. "Command Sergeant Major, I can't. The mission's been declassified as of last month. Show them." Slowly, reluctantly, Ashley rolled up her left sleeve. There, on her shoulder, was a tattoo unlike anything the others had seen. It was a stylized zan with a skull wearing a ghost shroud, and beneath it, a series of numbers, GU70841. But it was what was below the tattoo that made everyone step back. A massive scar tissue, burn marks clearly from an explosion, overlaid with what looked like surgical scars from multiple operations. "Earned that when she carried 2 wounded Delta operators out of a burning building," Rivers said, "after she'd already been shot twice and had shrapnel from an IED in her back. The medical report said she shouldn't have been able to walk, let alone carry 200-pound men half a mile to the extraction point." Blake's legs seemed to give out slightly. He steadied himself, his face cycling through emotions. But your supply?" "I'm retired," Ashley said quietly, speaking for the first time since Rivers had appeared. "Medically discharged after Blackwater. The injuries were too severe for active operations. They gave me a choice, full disability, or a quiet posting where I could still serve in some capacity. I chose to serve." "By counting boxes?" Blake asked, though there was no mockery in it now, just confusion. "By making sure warriors like you have what you need for your missions," Ashley replied. "Every bullet I count, every piece of equipment I inventory, it all matters. A ranger without ammunition is just a man. A medic without supplies can't save lives. I couldn't operate anymore, but I could still support the mission. Colonel Brooks had been silent throughout the exchange, but now he spoke. Command Sergeant Major Rivers, I assume you're here officially? Rivers pulled out a document from his jacket. Orders from JSOC. They have been monitoring the situation since Major Price's inquiry yesterday. Sergeant Walker's status is to remain classified, but given the circumstances, limited disclosure was authorized. He handed the document to Brooks, who read it quickly. His eyebrows rose. She's still active status? Reserve capacity. The ghost units are never fully retired. They're too valuable. She's been sheep-dipped as a supply specialist, but she maintains her clearances and operational readiness, just in case. In case of what? Price asked. Rivers smiled grimly. In case we need someone who can walk into hell and walk back out. It's happened before. It'll happen again. The medical team was loading Noah onto a stretcher, preparing to transport him to the medical facility. Captain Williams approached the group. Whatever she did saved his life. Another 5 minutes and we would have lost him. That was combat medicine at its finest. Ashley was staring at the ground, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. The carefully constructed persona she'd maintained for 18 months was shattered, and she looked almost lost without it. Connor Hayes and Marcus Stone had arrived during the revelations, drawn by the commotion. They stood at the edge of the group, their faces showing shock and something else, shame. They'd spent weeks tormenting someone who had sacrificed more for her country than they could imagine. I need to go, Ashley said suddenly. My shift starts soon. Your shift? Blake asked incredulously. You're a decorated special operations veteran, and you're worried about your shift in the supply room? Ashley looked at him directly for the first time, and there was something in her eyes that made him take a step back. Captain Mitchell, I've been to 13 countries that don't officially exist. I've completed missions that will never be acknowledged. I've lost everyone I've ever served with. This job, counting boxes and filling out forms, it's what keeps me grounded. It's what reminds me that I'm still human, not just a weapon. So, yes, I'm worried about my shift. She turned to Colonel Brooks. Sir, am I still banned from the training areas? Brooks looked at the orders Rivers had given him, then at Ashley. No, you have full access to any area of this base. In fact, he paused, seeming to wrestle with something. According to these orders, you technically outrank Captain Mitchell in operational hierarchy, despite your current listed rank. The silence that followed was deafening. Blake Mitchell, who'd lorded his rank and position over Ashley, who'd thrown her off his training field like she was trash, was technically her subordinate in the shadow world of special operations. Ashley shook her head. That's not relevant, sir. I'm not operational anymore. Captain Mitchell is in command of his training area, and I respect that. I'll submit proper requests for any future inventory needs. She started to walk away, but Rivers called after her. Walker? She turned back. They know about Unit 6. Ashley went completely still. What? They went dark 3 days ago. Syria. Same area where 7 operated in 2018. That's not my problem anymore, Ashley said. But her voice had changed, carried an edge that hadn't been there before. Maybe not, but they wanted you to know. In case. Ashley nodded once, then continued walking. The group watched her go, this small woman who'd endured their mockery and harassment without complaint, who had saved a life without seeking recognition, who carried secrets and scars that most of them couldn't imagine. As she disappeared into the supply building, Marcus Stone finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. We called her weak. We called her a lot of things, Connor added, his face flushed with shame. Blake remained silent, staring at the spot where Ashley had vanished. He'd built his entire identity around being an elite warrior, around being better than others, stronger, more capable. And he'd just learned that the person he'd dismissed as worthless had operated at a level he'd probably never reach. Major Price was still reading through the fragments of information his clearance allowed him to access. Operation Blackwater. 6 operators against an entire terrorist cell. They had one of our diplomats. We're going to execute him on video. Ghost 7 went in despite intelligence saying it was a suicide mission. What happened? Liam Harper asked. He'd arrived late but had heard enough to understand the significance. Classified, Price said. But from what I can piece together, it went sideways fast. IED at the entry point took out 2 operators immediately. The rest fought their way in, rescued the diplomat, but got pinned down during extraction. Building caught fire from an RPG strike. Walker, he paused, reading. Walker held the extraction point alone for 17 minutes, while the others evacuated. 17 minutes against an unknown number of hostiles. How? Blake asked, his voice hoarse. Because that's what Ghost Unit operators do, Rivers said. They do the impossible. They go where others can't. They survive when they shouldn't. And when they can't operate anymore, they find other ways to serve, even if that means enduring harassment from people who should know better. The weight of his words settled over the group like a heavy blanket. Each of them was remembering their interactions with Ashley, the mockery, the deliberate intimidation, the attempts to make her feel small and worthless. I need to apologize, Blake said suddenly. She won't accept it, Rivers replied. It's not in her nature. She'll tell you there's nothing to apologize for, that you were just doing your job. She'll minimize what she's been through because that's how she copes, but you should try anyway. As the group dispersed, each lost in their own thoughts, the morning sun climbed higher over Fort Bragg. The day continued with its usual routine of training and preparation, but something fundamental had shifted. The base's best-kept secret was out, and nothing would be the same. 3 days passed in a strange new dynamic at Fort Bragg. Ashley continued her supply duties with the same quiet efficiency as before, but now soldiers stepped aside when she walked through the halls. Conversation stopped when she entered rooms. The woman who had been invisible was now the center of constant, uncomfortable attention. She was conducting inventory in the main supply warehouse when footsteps echoed through the massive space. Not the heavy boots of soldiers, but the deliberate steps of someone approaching with purpose. Ashley didn't look up from her clipboard, even when the footsteps stopped directly behind her. Sergeant Walker, Blake Mitchell's voice was different now, stripped of its earlier arrogance, carrying something that might have been humility. Ashley turned slowly, her expression neutral. Captain Mitchell, do you need supplies? Blake stood there in his combat uniform, but somehow looked smaller than before. Behind him, Connor Hayes, Marcus Stone, and Ethan Cross waited at a respectful distance. The pack dynamics had completely reversed. They now approached her with the caution of subordinates approaching a superior they'd wronged. I came to apologize, Blake said, the words clearly difficult for him. My behavior was inexcusable. Ashley studied him for a moment, then returned to her inventory. There's nothing to apologize for, Captain. You were maintaining discipline in your training area. That's your job. Stop, Blake said, more forcefully than he'd intended. When Ashley looked back at him, he continued more softly. Please don't do that. Don't minimize what we did. We harassed you. We tried to humiliate you. You treated me exactly how I appeared to be, Ashley interrupted. A supply clerk who didn't belong in tactical areas. Your response was predictable and, from your perspective, justified. Marcus Stone stepped forward, his face flushed. It wasn't justified. We were bullies. We enjoyed making you feel small. Ashley set down her clipboard and faced them fully. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, not anger, but a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Gentlemen, I've been interrogated by terrorists who removed my fingernails one by one. I've been waterboarded, electrocuted, and beaten until my ribs broke. Do you really think some harsh words from American soldiers bothered me? The casual delivery of that information hit them like a physical blow. Connor actually stepped back, his face paling. These weren't abstract war stories. This was lived experience, trauma that she carried as quietly as she carried everything else. Then why didn't you say something? Ethan asked. Why let us... Because I'm tired, Ashley said simply. Tired of being special. Tired of being different. For 18 months, I got to be nobody. Do you have any idea how precious that is? To walk into a room and not have people know what I've done, what I've survived? To just be another face in the crowd? She picked up her clipboard again. You took that from me. Not with your harassment, but with your curiosity. Now everyone knows, and I'm back to being the curiosity, the anomaly, the ghost story that walks. Blake wanted to say something, anything, to make it right. But what could he possibly say to someone who'd lost everything and asked only to be left alone to serve quietly? Before anyone could respond, the warehouse alarm sounded, 3 sharp blasts that meant immediate assembly. It wasn't a drill tone, it was the real thing. All 5 of them immediately started toward the assembly area, their trained responses overriding personal issues. The main parade ground was filling rapidly with personnel. Colonel Brooks stood at the podium with Major Price and several other senior officers. The large display screen behind them showed a map of Syria with a red circle marking a specific region. "Attention," Brooks commanded, and 500 soldiers snapped to immediate stillness. At 0200 hours local time, we lost contact with a classified operation in Syria. I'm authorized to tell you that American personnel are trapped in hostile territory with no immediate extraction available. Ashley's entire body had gone rigid. She knew this briefing wasn't for general forces. This was about Ghost Unit 6. Brooks continued, "We're mobilizing rapid response teams, but I need to be clear about the situation. The enemy has anti-aircraft systems that make helicopter extraction impossible. The terrain prevents vehicle access. We're looking at a minimum of 72 hours before conventional forces can reach them." "How many?" someone called out from the formation. "8 operators," Brooks replied. "They have approximately 12 hours of supplies remaining." Ashley was already moving, walking against the flow of soldiers. She pushed through the crowd with the kind of determination that made people step aside instinctively. Blake and the others followed, not sure why, but sensing something significant was happening. She reached the podium just as Brooks was outlining potential response strategies. "Colonel," Brooks looked down at her. "Sergeant Walker, return to formation." "Sir, you're talking about Ghost Unit 6. That's classified information. Not to me." Ashley's voice carried across the entire assembly area. "Unit 6 is commanded by Master Chief Nathan Cross. 8 operators, including 2 I trained personally. Their last known position was grid reference 32 November, approximately 40 clicks from where Unit 7 operated in 2018. Price stepped forward. "How could you know their position? That information—" "Ghost units share emergency protocols," Ashley interrupted. "If 6 went dark, they would have triggered a beacon that only other Ghost operatives can decode. I received it 3 days ago." The admission created a ripple through the assembled troops. Rivers had mentioned Unit 6 to Ashley, but this was confirmation that the Ghost units maintained their own communication networks, their own protocols, separate from conventional military channels. "Can you reach them?" Brooks asked urgently. Ashley pulled out a phone that looked standard but clearly wasn't, given how Major Price's eyes widened when he saw it. She input a complex series of codes, waited, then shook her head. No response, but the beacon is still active, which means at least one of them is alive. "We need solutions," Brooks said to his senior staff. "Options that don't involve sending more people to their deaths." Ashley looked at the map on the display, her mind already working through possibilities. She'd operated in that region, knew the terrain intimately. The mountains were brutal, but they also provided opportunities if you knew where to look. "There's a way," she said quietly, but her voice carried. Every head turned toward her. "The northern approach through the Jabal and Nusayriya mountains. It's considered impassable for conventional forces, but Ghost units aren't conventional forces," Rivers said, having appeared from wherever he had been observing. "You're thinking of a halo insertion to the ridge, aren't you?" Ashley nodded. "Single operator, light equipment, navigate the mountain passes on foot, reach Unit 6, establish communication for precision airstrikes to clear an extraction corridor." "That's a suicide mission," Blake said, forgetting protocol in his shock. "One person against unknown enemy forces in impossible terrain?" Ashley looked at him with those tired eyes. "It's Tuesday for a Ghost operative." Brooks was shaking his head. "You're medically retired, non-operational status. I can't authorize." "You can't," Rivers interrupted. "But I can." He pulled out another set of orders, these bearing stamps and signatures, that made Brooks step back. Joint Special Operations Command anticipated this possibility when 6 went dark. "Sergeant First Class Walker is hereby recalled to active operational status for the duration of this crisis." "She can't," Marcus protested. "Her injuries." Ashley was already rolling up her right sleeve, revealing more scars, surgical ones, running from wrist to shoulder. "Reconstructive surgery, titanium pins in 3 places, 70% mobility on a good day." She rolled the sleeve back down. "More than enough for what needs to be done." "This is insane," Blake said. "You're talking about—" "I'm talking about doing my job," Ashley cut him off. "The job I was trained for. The job I'm apparently still needed for." She turned to Rivers. "How long do I have to prep?" "Wheels up in 3 hours. Halo Bird is already inbound from Pope Field." 3 hours. Ashley nodded, her entire demeanor shifting. The quiet supply clerk was gone, replaced by someone the watching soldiers had never seen before, a predator preparing for a hunt. I need access to the special equipment locker, she told Brooks. And someone needs to call Captain Williams. I want a full medical kit, not the standard field setup. Include extra hemostatic agents and chest seals. Brooks nodded to Price, who immediately started making calls. The colonel then addressed the assembled troops. You're dismissed. Selected personnel will receive specific taskings. The rest of you, maintain readiness. As the formation dispersed, Blake caught Ashley's arm gently. You don't have to do this. You've already given enough. Ashley looked at his hand on her arm, and Blake immediately released her. Captain, 8 Americans are dying in a Syrian hellhole. They have 12 hours, maybe less. I can reach them in 6 if everything goes right. Tell me who else can do that. Blake had no answer because there wasn't one. Ashley was uniquely qualified. She knew the terrain, had the skills, and most importantly, had the psychological capability to operate alone in impossible conditions. The next 2 hours were a blur of preparation. Ashley transformed from supply clerk to special operator with methodical precision. In the equipment room, she selected gear with the careful attention of someone who knew that every ounce mattered. Every piece of equipment could mean the difference between success and failure. She chose an HK-416 rifle with a suppressor, compact and reliable, a Glock 19 as a sidearm, enough ammunition for sustained engagement, but not so much that it would slow her down. Night vision equipment, GPS systems hardened against electronic warfare, communication gear that could punch through almost any interference. Captain Williams arrived with the medical supplies, her face grim. Ashley, your medical records are irrelevant, Ashley finished, checking each medical component. I need you to understand something, Captain. My body is held together by surgical steel and determination. I have maybe 5 years before the damage catches up completely. If I'm going to burn those years, I'd rather burn them saving Americans than counting boxes. Williams wanted to protest but saw the futility of it. Instead, she helped Ashley organize the medical supplies, adding extras of critical items. The hemostatic agents will help, but if you take a serious hit, then I'll die doing something that matters, Ashley said simply. Word had spread through the base about what was happening. As Ashley made her way to the airfield, soldiers lined the route. They didn't cheer or call out. This wasn't that kind of moment. Instead, they stood at attention, rendering silent salutes as she passed. The woman they'd dismissed, mocked, and overlooked was walking toward almost certain death to save fellow warriors. At the airfield, the MC-130J Commando 2 waited, its engines already warming up. The aircrew watched Ashley approach with expressions of professional respect. They'd flown special operators into hell before, but rarely alone, and never someone who looked like they should be teaching elementary school rather than conducting high-risk operations. Blake, Connor, Marcus, Ethan, and surprisingly, most of Ashley's tormentors had gathered at the edge of the tarmac. As she approached the aircraft, Blake stepped forward one more time. "Come back," he said simply. "That's an order from someone you technically outrank but who needs to say it anyway." Ashley almost smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth anyone had seen from her. "Captain Mitchell, I've never been good at following orders. Ask anyone." She climbed into the aircraft without looking back. The ramp closed, engines roared to full power, and within minutes the MC-130J was disappearing into the evening sky, carrying one small woman toward 8 trapped Americans and an unknown number of enemies. Inside the aircraft, Ashley sat alone in the cargo area, running through mental checklists. The aircrew occasionally glanced back at her. This anomaly, who was about to attempt something that would be challenging for a full team of operators in peak condition. The loadmaster, Senior Airman Patricia Chen, finally approached her. "Ma'am, we'll be over the drop zone in 4 hours. Anything you need?" Ashley looked up from the map she'd been memorizing. "Just a smooth ride and a clean drop, Airman. The rest is on me." 4 hours to think, to plan, to remember why she'd agreed to this. The truth was simple. Those 8 operators would do the same for her. Had done the same, in fact. Nathan Cross, commander of Unit 6, had been part of the quick reaction force that tried to reach Unit 7 during Blackwater. They'd been turned back by overwhelming enemy forces, but they'd tried. Now it was her turn. The aircraft climbed to 30,000 feet, heading east toward a sunrise that Ashley might not live to see again. But that was acceptable. She'd made peace with death years ago, had walked hand in hand with it through countless operations. The only question now was whether she could cheat it one more time, long enough to bring 8 Americans home. At Fort Bragg, the base had gone quiet. In the operations center, Colonel Brooks, Major Price, and Rivers monitored every piece of intelligence they could gather. Satellite imagery showed the area where 6 was trapped, a valley surrounded by hostile forces, with no good options for conventional extraction. "She's really going in alone," Price said, still struggling to accept it. "That's how ghosts operate," Rivers replied. "One person can move where a team can't. One person can disappear where a team would be spotted. And Ashley Walker is the best ghost we ever produced." "Then why was she counting boxes for 18 months?" Brooks asked. Rivers pulled up a classified file on his tablet, showing a medical report that made Brooks wince. 17 fractures, third-degree burns over 20% of her body, traumatic brain injury, punctured lung, damaged kidney, and enough shrapnel that she sets off metal detectors from 10 feet away. The doctor said she'd never walk again. She was running within 6 months. "Running where?" "Away from the ghosts," Rivers said quietly. "Not the unit, the actual ghosts. The faces of everyone she couldn't save. Survivor's guilt is bad enough for regular soldiers. For someone who lost their entire unit, who was the only one to walk out of that hell? It's unbearable." Back in the MC-130J, Ashley was suiting up for the jump. The halo, high altitude, low opening, insertion would put her on a mountain ridge at night, in hostile territory, with no backup and no margin for error. The oxygen mask covered her face as she checked her equipment one final time. 2 minutes to drop, the pilot announced. Ashley stood at the ramp as it began to lower, revealing the night sky at 30,000 feet. The cold hit like a physical assault, but she'd felt worse. Below, Syria stretched out in darkness, hiding 8 Americans who needed her to be perfect. "Green light in 30 seconds, the loadmaster announced. Ashley checked her altimeter, her GPS, her weapons. Everything secure, everything ready. In 30 seconds, she would step into the void and trust that her broken body could still do what it had been trained to do. "Green light! Go! Go! Go!" Ashley didn't hesitate. She stepped off the ramp and fell into the darkness, plummeting toward Earth at terminal velocity. The ground rushed up to meet her, but she felt no fear. This was where she belonged, between heaven and earth, between life and death, in the space where only ghosts could operate. At 4,000 feet, she deployed her parachute, the sudden deceleration jarring her damaged spine. She gritted her teeth against the pain and focused on the GPS coordinates. The landing zone was a narrow ridge, barely 50 feet wide. Miss it, and she'd either hit a cliff face or tumble into a ravine. She hit the ridge perfectly, her legs absorbing the impact despite the protests from her reconstructed joints. She quickly gathered her parachute, buried it under rocks, and checked her position. 6 miles from Unit 6's last known location, through terrain that would challenge a healthy operator. For someone held together by titanium and willpower, it would be agony. But agony was just information, and Ashley had learned to process information without letting it control her. She began moving, each step calculated, each breath measured. The night vision goggles turned the world into shades of green, but she knew these mountains. Different country, same type of terrain she'd operated in before. 2 hours into her movement, she heard them. Voices carried on the wind, speaking Arabic with Syrian accents. She froze, becoming one with the rocks around her. A patrol, maybe 6 men, moving along a goat path below her position. They were relaxed, talking loudly, unaware that death was watching them from above. Ashley could have engaged them, probably could have eliminated all 6 before they knew what hit them, but that would alert every enemy force in the area. Instead, she waited, patient as stone, until they passed. Then she continued, a ghost moving through their territory without leaving a trace. At Fort Bragg, the operations center had transformed into a war room. Real-time satellite footage showed Ashley's beacon moving steadily through the mountains. They couldn't see her, the resolution wasn't that good, but they knew she was still alive, still moving toward the objective. "She's made incredible time," Price observed. 3 miles in 2 hours through that terrain is exceptional. "She's burning herself out," Captain Williams said. She'd been brought in to monitor the medical implications of what Ashley was attempting. Based on her injuries, she's probably in significant pain already. The cold will be making the metal pins in her bones ache. The altitude will be affecting her reduced lung capacity, and she'll keep going anyway, Rivers interrupted. That's what makes her a ghost. Blake and his team had refused to leave, sitting in the back of the operations center. They watched the beacon move, this small dot representing the woman they'd tormented, now their only hope of saving 8 Americans. "I've done halo jumps," Connor said quietly. "They're brutal even when you're healthy. With her injuries—" "Stop," Blake ordered. "She doesn't need our doubts. She needs us to believe she can do this." Ashley reached a cliff face that blocked her path. According to the map, going around would add 2 hours she didn't have. Going over meant free climbing 200 feet of sheer rock in the dark, with 60 pounds of equipment. She started climbing. Every handhold sent fire through her damaged nerves. Every time she pulled herself up, her reconstructed shoulder screamed in protest. Halfway up, her left hand, the one with the most surgical reconstruction, started to go numb from the cold and strain. She paused, hanging by one hand, and forced feeling back into the fingers through sheer determination. 150 feet up, a handhold crumbled. For a moment, she hung by just her right hand, her body swinging out over the void. A fall from this height would end everything. The mission, the hope of rescue, her life. But Ashley had hung over worse voids, both literal and metaphorical. She found another hold, pulled herself back to the face, and kept climbing. At the top, she lay on her back for exactly 60 seconds, forcing her breathing back to normal, letting her muscles recover slightly. Then she was up and moving again, because 8 Americans were counting on her even if they didn't know it. The GPS showed her 2 miles from the target when she heard the gunfire. Automatic weapons, multiple shooters, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. Unit 6 was still fighting, still alive. She increased her pace, ignoring the protests from her body, focusing only on the mission. She came over a ridge and saw them below, the remnants of Ghost Unit 6 trapped in a narrow ravine, surrounded by at least 40 hostiles. The enemy had the high ground, the numbers, and time on their side. They were conducting a siege, content to wait for the Americans to run out of ammunition. Ashley pulled out her encrypted radio and input the Ghost frequency. "Phantom 7 to Phantom 6, do you copy?" The response was immediate, filled with disbelief. "Walker? Ashley Walker? That's impossible." "Nothing's impossible, Nathan. Mark your position with IR strobes and get ready. The cavalry has arrived." "The cavalry is one broken operator?" "One is all you get. Make it count." Ashley set up her rifle, using the bipod for stability. The range was extreme, over 800 meters to some of the enemy positions. With her damaged hands and the wind conditions, these would be some of the most difficult shots she'd ever attempted. She took a breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The suppressed rifle coughed quietly, and 800 meters away, an enemy machine gunner slumped over his weapon. Before his companions could react, Ashley had shifted targets. Another squeeze, another enemy down. She was choosing her targets carefully. Leaders, heavy weapons operators, anyone who seemed to be coordinating the siege. But 40 enemies was too many for one rifle, even in the hands of a ghost. They began to react, to search for the sniper, to direct fire toward her position. Ashley had to move, but moving meant losing her angle on several enemy positions. That's when she heard it, the distant thrum of helicopters. Not normal helicopters, but the distinctive sound of MH-60 Blackhawks, the kind used by special operations. Rivers hadn't just sent her alone after all. "Phantom 7, this is Nightmare 1, a voice crackled over her radio. "We're 8 minutes out, but we need those SAM sites down or we're going to have a very short flight." Surface-to-air missiles. Ashley hadn't seen them from her position, but she knew they had to be there. The enemy wasn't stupid. They'd prepare for American air support. "Copy, Nightmare. Stand by." Ashley abandoned her sniper position and began moving along the ridge, searching for the SAM sites. She found them 200 meters from her position. 3 launch sites with Russian-made missiles, crews standing ready. They were expecting helicopters to come from the west, the logical approach path. They weren't expecting a single operator to be above and behind them. Ashley pulled out her last demo charge. She'd brought it for breaching, but this was more important. She set the timer for 3 minutes and began her approach. The SAM crews were focused on their equipment, watching the skies for incoming aircraft. They never saw her coming. She placed the charge at the central site, the one that would create the most secondary explosions. 2 minutes on the timer. Then she began her withdrawal, but one of the crew members chose that moment to check their perimeter. He saw her, shouted a warning, and suddenly she had 15 enemies converging on her position. Ashley ran, her damaged body pushed beyond its limits. Bullets cracked past her head, impacted the rocks around her. She turned, fired a burst from her rifle, kept running. 1 minute on the timer, an enemy fighter appeared directly in her path. She didn't have time to bring her rifle around, so she simply crashed into him, using momentum to drive him backward. They went down together, rolling across the rocky ground. He was bigger, stronger, but Ashley had been taught to fight by the best. She got her knife into his throat before he could call for help, then kept running. 30 seconds. More enemies were converging. She was cut off from her original position, forced to move laterally along the ridge. Her left leg, the one with the most reconstruction, was starting to fail, each step sending shooting pains up her spine. 10 seconds. Ashley dove behind a rock formation just as the charges detonated. The explosion was massive, secondary detonations from the missile fuel creating a pillar of fire that lit up the night sky. The blast wave hit her even behind cover, slamming her against the rocks hard enough to crack ribs. But the SAM sights were gone. "A Nightmare 1, you're clear," she gasped into the radio. "Roger that, Phantom. 60 seconds out." Ashley forced herself to her feet, ribs protesting, leg barely functional. She could hear the helicopters now, could see their running lights as they approached the valley. The enemy forces were panicking, some trying to engage the helicopters, others attempting to assault Unit 6's position before extraction could happen. She limped back to an overlooked position and began firing again. Not the precise, calculated shots from before, but rapid fire designed to suppress and confuse. She had to buy Unit 6 time to reach the extraction point. Below she could see Ghost Unit 6 moving, 4 operators carrying wounded, the others providing cover. Nathan Cross was visible in her scope, the big Master Chief dragging 2 wounded men by their vest straps, refusing to leave anyone behind. The Blackhawks came in hot, door gunners laying down suppressive fire. One bird landed in the narrow valley, while the other provided overhead cover. Ashley watched Unit 6 loading their wounded, counted heads. 7. There should be 8. "Nathan, you're missing one," she called over the radio. "Ramirez is gone," Nathan replied, his voice heavy. "Took an RPG, saving 2 others. We have his body." Ashley's throat tightened. Another ghost lost. Another name added to the list of people she'd failed to save. The helicopters lifted off, taking fire but climbing steadily. They'd done it. Unit 6 was extracted, but Ashley was still on the ridge, surrounded by enemies who now knew exactly where she was. "Phantom 7, we have space for one more," Nightmare 1 called. "Negative," Ashley replied. "Too hot for a pickup. Get them home. We're not leaving you. That's an order, Nightmare. I'll find my own way out." It was a lie, and everyone monitoring the radio knew it. Ashley was injured, exhausted, and surrounded by hostile forces. But landing to extract her would risk the helicopters and everyone on them. The Blackhawks disappeared into the night, carrying 8 Americans to safety. Ashley watched them go, then assessed her situation. She had maybe 30 rounds left, a pistol with 2 magazines, her knife, and a body that was failing her, against 40-plus enemies who were converging on her position. At Fort Bragg, the operations center had gone silent. They could see Ashley's beacon, stationary now, surrounded by enemy signals. "She saved them," someone said quietly. "And doomed herself," Blake added, his voice thick with emotion. Rivers stood at the main display, his face carved from stone. "She's not done yet. Ghosts don't die easy." Ashley heard them coming, boots on rocks, voices calling to each other in Arabic. They were being cautious, knowing she was dangerous, but they had numbers and time on their side. She looked at her rifle, her pistol, the knife, then she looked at the cliff edge 20 feet away. It was a 300-foot drop to the valley floor. Certain death, but on her terms. Then her radio crackled one more time. "Phantom 7, this is Viper 2-1. Stand by for immediate close air support. A-10 Warthogs." Ashley almost laughed. The Air Force was sending tank killers to save a single operator. "Viper, Phantom 7. I have no marking capability, and danger close isn't going to cover it. Roger that, Phantom. Can you make it to the cliff edge?" Ashley understood immediately. The cliff would provide cover from the strafing runs, while allowing the A-10s to devastate everything on the ridge. She started moving, her left leg dragging now, barely functional, 20 feet to cover. The enemy was close, maybe 30 seconds away. She could hear their voices clearly, hear magazines being changed, weapons being readied. The first A-10 came in like thunder, its GAU-8 cannon sending a stream of 30mm rounds across the ridge. The sound was distinctive, a deep tearing growl that seemed to rip the air itself apart. Earth and stone exploded in a line of destruction that passed within feet of Ashley's position. She reached the cliff edge and simply rolled over, catching a small ledge 3 feet down. She pressed herself against the rock face as the second A-10 made its run, the rounds impacting so close that rock fragments rained down on her. The enemy forces were devastated. Those who weren't killed outright were scattered, confused, terrified. The A-10s made 2 more passes, turning the ridge into a moonscape of craters and destruction. Phantom 7, ridge is clear. Friendly forces are 90 minutes out. Can you hold? Ashley looked at her shaking hands, felt the blood seeping from various wounds, knew her body was approaching complete failure. I'll hold. She pulled herself back onto the ridge, now empty except for the dead. She found a defensible position among the rocks and settled in to wait. 90 minutes. She could last 90 minutes. At Fort Bragg, the entire command staff was watching Ashley's beacon. It hadn't moved in 10 minutes, but it was still transmitting. Medical team standing by, Captain Williams reported. Based on her condition before departure and what she's been through, she's going to need immediate trauma intervention. She'll make it, Rivers said with absolute certainty. She's a ghost. She'll make it because the mission isn't complete until she reports in. Blake found himself praying for the first time in years. Not to any specific deity, but to the universe itself, asking that this woman who'd already given so much be allowed to survive. The 90 minutes passed like hours. Ashley drifted in and out of consciousness, her body finally approaching its limits. She heard helicopters again, American voices calling her name, but couldn't seem to respond. Someone was lifting her, carrying her, but it all seemed very far away. She woke briefly during the flight, surrounded by medical personnel working frantically. She tried to speak, to ask about Unit 6, but someone put an oxygen mask over her face and told her to rest. The next time she woke, she was in a hospital bed at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. The room was full of flowers, cards, and several familiar faces. Nathan Cross was there, his arm in a sling, but otherwise intact. Rivers sat in a chair by the window, and surprisingly, Blake Mitchell stood at the foot of her bed. "Welcome back, Ghost," Rivers said. Ashley tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Nathan handed her water, helped her drink. 6? She asked. "All safe," Nathan confirmed. "Thanks to you. You saved 8 lives, Ashley." 7, she corrected. "Ramirez would have wanted us to focus on the living," Nathan interrupted. "That's what ghosts do." Blake stepped forward. "The entire base has been following your recovery. You've been unconscious for 3 days. The doctor said..." He paused, struggling with emotion. "They said you pushed your body so far beyond its limits that you basically shut down. Multiple organ stress, severe dehydration, 3 cracked ribs, torn muscles throughout your legs and back, and your left shoulder needs another surgery." Ashley absorbed this information with the same calm she absorbed everything. "But I'm alive." "Barely," Rivers said. "The doctors want to medically retire you. Permanently this time." Ashley was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "What do you want?" Rivers smiled, the first genuine warmth she'd seen from him. "I want you to teach. The Ghost program needs instructors who've been there, who understand what it really means to operate beyond the possible. No more field operations, but you'd be training the next generation." "And if I just want to go back to counting boxes," Blake spoke up, "then you'll have the respect and support of every soldier at Fort Bragg. You've more than earned the right to choose your own path." Ashley looked out the window at the German countryside, so different from the mountains of Syria or the training grounds of Fort Bragg. She thought about the 18 months she'd spent trying to disappear, to be nobody, to escape the weight of being a ghost. "I'll teach," she said finally, "but on one condition. No special treatment, no celebrity status. I'm just another instructor doing a job." Rivers laughed. "Ashley, you just conducted a solo Halo insertion into hostile territory, eliminated multiple enemy positions, orchestrated the rescue of 8 operators, and survived surrounded by hostile forces. You're never going to be just anything again." 2 months later, Ashley stood in front of a classroom at Fort Bragg's Special Operations Training Facility. Her left arm was still in a brace from the shoulder surgery, but she stood straight, commanding the room's attention without effort. The class was made up of the best, Rangers, Green Berets, SEALs, all being evaluated for the Ghost program. Among them, surprisingly, were Blake Mitchell and Ethan Cross, both having requested and received permission to try out for the elite unit. "Gentlemen," Ashley began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned the right to speak, You think you're here to become better warriors. You're wrong. You're here to learn how to become something that doesn't exist, to do things that never happened, to be people who were never there. She moved to the board, writing with her good hand. The Ghost program isn't about being the strongest or the fastest or even the smartest. It's about being able to operate when everything goes wrong, when you're alone, when the mission is impossible, and when failure means Americans die. She turned back to the class. Over the next 6 months, I'm going to break you down and rebuild you. Some of you won't make it, most of you won't make it, but those who do will join a brotherhood that transcends rank, service branch, or recognition. You'll become ghosts. Blake raised his hand. Instructor Walker, what's the most important quality for a ghost operative? Ashley looked at him directly. The ability to endure, not just pain or hardship, but the weight of what you'll do, what you'll see, and what you'll never be able to talk about. Ghosts carry secrets that would break normal people. The question is, can you carry them without breaking? As the class continued, Ashley found herself thinking about the strange path that had led her here. From elite operator to broken veteran to supply clerk to instructor, each phase had taught her something different about service, sacrifice, and the true meaning of strength. That evening, she returned to her small apartment off base. It was sparse, functional, containing only the essentials. But on the wall was a new addition, a photo of Ghost Unit 7, taken before Blackwater. 6 faces besides her own, all gone now, but not forgotten. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Walker? Phantom 7, this is Phantom 1. Ashley's blood chilled. Phantom 1 was the designation for the commander of all Ghost units, someone whose identity was known to fewer than a dozen people in the world. Sir, I wanted to thank you personally for bringing 6 home, and to let you know that your actions have been noted at the highest levels. I was just doing my job, sir. No, you were doing what ghosts do, the impossible. Rest up, 7. The world's not getting any safer, and we may need you again. The line went dead. Ashley stood at her window, looking out at Fort Bragg in the distance. Somewhere out there, new ghosts were being forged, trained by those who'd walked in the shadows before them. Her phone buzzed with a text from Blake. Thank you for giving me a second chance to be better. She didn't respond. Words weren't necessary. Actions mattered, and Blake was taking action by trying out for the Ghost program. Whether he made it or not, he was trying to be worthy of the sacrifice she and others had made. Another text, this one from Nathan Cross. Unit 6 is operational again. We named our new member Ramirez. Thought you should know. Ashley smiled slightly. The ghosts continued, one generation teaching the next, the fallen replaced but never forgotten. As night fell over Fort Bragg, Ashley Walker sat at her desk, preparing lesson plans for tomorrow's training. The supply clerk who'd been mocked and dismissed was gone, replaced by someone tempered by fire, broken and rebuilt, who understood that true strength came not from what you could do, but from what you could endure. The ghost tattoo on her shoulder ached in the evening cold, a permanent reminder of who she'd been and what she'd survived. But it was no longer a burden. It was a badge of honor, earned in blood and sacrifice, marking her as one of the few who'd walked in the shadows and returned to guide others into the darkness. Somewhere in Syria, in the mountains where she'd nearly died, her blood still stained the rocks. But 8 Americans were home because of that blood, and that made everything worthwhile. The next morning brought new challenges, new students, new opportunities to forge warriors capable of doing the impossible. Ashley stood before her class, no longer hiding, no longer running from what she was. Today, she announced to the prospective ghosts, you learn what it really means to be forgotten in service to your country, to be erased from history while making history, to be nobody while being everything that stands between America and its enemies. She wrote on the board, the only easy day was yesterday. That's the SEAL's motto, someone called out. Wrong, Ashley replied. For ghosts, there are no easy days. There's only the mission, the team, and the willingness to do what others can't or won't. Yesterday doesn't matter because yesterday you were someone else. Today, you begin becoming no one. Tomorrow, if you survive and succeed, you'll be a ghost. As she taught, Ashley thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. The harassment from Blake and others had been painful, yes, but it had also forced her out of hiding, forced her to confront who she really was instead of pretending to be nobody. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to our greatest purpose. Her phone vibrated with an encrypted message. New intelligence about a terrorist cell in Somalia. The analysts were saying it would require a full battalion to assault. Ashley smiled grimly. A battalion, or perhaps just one or two ghosts. She looked at her students, these elite warriors who thought they were already the best. They had no idea what they were about to become, what she would forge them into. But some of them, maybe Blake, maybe Ethan, maybe someone unexpected, would join the ranks of those who operated beyond the possible. Instructor Walker? Blake asked, noticing her momentary distraction. Just remembering, Captain Mitchell, that the hardest battles we fight are often with ourselves. The enemy is just an excuse to discover what we're really made of. She turned back to the lesson, but her mind was already working through the Somalia intelligence. She might be officially retired from field operations, but ghosts never really retired. They just waited in the shadows for the moment when the impossible needed to become possible again. For now, though, she had a different mission, creating the next generation of warriors who could walk into hell and come back carrying their brothers. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she'd earned through blood, sacrifice, and the absolute refusal to let Americans die on her watch. As the lesson continued, Ashley noticed one student in particular, a young woman, barely meeting the physical requirements, but with eyes that held the same determination Ashley had once carried. She made a mental note to watch that one carefully. The best ghosts were often the ones nobody expected. Remember, Ashley concluded the morning session, in the ghost units, we don't leave anyone behind. Not our living, not our dead, and not our wounded. That's not just a motto, it's a blood oath. Break it, and you break everything we stand for. The students filed out for their physical training, but Blake lingered. Instructor Walker, can I ask you something? Ashley nodded. Do you regret it? Everything you've sacrificed? Ashley was quiet for a long moment. I regret the ones I couldn't save. I regret that my body is held together by metal and stubbornness. I regret that I'll never be whole again. But regret the service itself? Never. Every scar, every surgery, every nightmare, they're all receipts for Americans who came home. That's a transaction I'd make again. Blake absorbed this, then asked, why didn't you fight back when we harassed you? You could have destroyed us. Because you weren't my enemy, Captain. You were just soldiers being soldiers, establishing pecking order, protecting your territory. Fighting you would have been like fighting my own shadow, pointless and destructive. Better to endure and wait for understanding to come in its own time. And if understanding never came, Ashley shrugged with her good shoulder. Then I would have continued counting boxes and being invisible. Sometimes the greatest service is the one nobody sees. Blake left, but Ashley knew he'd be back. He had the hunger now, the need to prove himself worthy of the sacrifice others had made. Whether he'd make it through the ghost training remained to be seen, but the attempt itself was a form of honor. That night, Ashley received another call. This time it was Rivers. We have a situation. I'm an instructor now, remember? I remember, but Phantom 1 has requested you specifically, not for field work, but for planning. Your knowledge of the Syrian mountains is unmatched, and we have new intelligence about a chemical weapons facility. Ashley closed her eyes. It never ended. There would always be another mission, another crisis, another moment when America needed its ghosts. Send me the intelligence. I'll review it tonight. Ashley, you know you can say no. You've done enough. Have I? 8 Americans are alive because I said yes last time. How many might die if I say no now? Rivers was quiet, then said, You really are the best of us. No, Ashley corrected. I'm just what's left of us. The best are buried in Arlington and unmarked graves around the world. I'm just trying to honor their sacrifice by continuing the work. After Rivers hung up, Ashley spread the intelligence photos across her table. A chemical weapons facility in Syria, heavily defended, requiring surgical precision to eliminate without causing massive collateral damage. Impossible for conventional forces. Perfect for ghosts. As she worked through the night, planning approaches and contingencies, Ashley thought about the recruits she was training. Some of them would eventually execute operations like this. Some would come home, some wouldn't. But all of them would carry forward the ghost legacy, the willingness to be forgotten in service to others, to be erased from history while making history, to walk into hell knowing they might never walk out. Her shoulder ached as she wrote, the reconstructed joint protesting the hours of work. But pain was just information, and Ashley had learned to file it away with all the other information that didn't immediately matter. What mattered was the mission, always the mission. As dawn broke over Fort Bragg, Ashley finally completed the operational plan. It would require 4 ghosts, inserted at different points, coordinating a simultaneous assault that would look like a larger force. High risk, but achievable with the right operators. She thought about requesting to be one of the 4, then looked at her arm still in its brace. Her operational days were over, but her knowledge, her experience, her ability to see patterns and possibilities, those remained intact. Her phone rang one more time. Unknown number. Walker. 7, this is 6, Nathan Cross's voice. Heard you're planning our next vacation. Your intelligence is good. We want you on Overwatch, not in the field, but running the operation from the Tactical Operations Center. Your brain, our bodies. Ashley considered. It was a compromise. She'd be part of the mission without the physical demands she could no longer meet. When? 48 hours. I'll be there. As she prepared for another day of teaching, Ashley realized that this was her new normal, training the next generation while supporting current operations, bridging the gap between what was and what would be. The supply clerk who'd been mocked and dismissed seemed like a lifetime ago. But that experience had taught her something valuable, that service came in many forms, that strength wasn't always visible, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was endure until the moment when your true purpose revealed itself. Her students were arriving for the morning session. Ashley stood, pushed through the pain, and prepared to teach them what it really meant to be forgotten heroes. Gentlemen, she began as they took their seats, today you learn about sacrifice, not the kind they write about in history books, but the kind that never gets written about at all. She pulled down a map of Syria, pointing to a location. In 48 hours, Ghost Unit 6 will conduct an operation here. I'll be running Overwatch. Some of you, if you make it through this program, will eventually conduct similar operations. The question you need to ask yourself is not whether you're brave enough to die for your country. Anyone can die. The question is whether you are strong enough to be forgotten by your country while serving it. Blake raised his hand. Is that why you didn't reveal yourself for so long? You were comfortable being forgotten? No, Captain. I was hiding from the weight of being remembered. Every time someone knew what I'd done, I had to carry not just my own expectations, but theirs. Being nobody meant I could just exist without the burden of being special. But you are special, Ethan said. What you've done, what I've done is my job. Nothing more, nothing less. The moment you start thinking you're special is the moment you stop being effective. Ghosts don't do what we do for recognition. We do it because it needs doing, and we're the ones who can. She turned to the board, writing operational parameters for the Syria mission. Now, let's discuss how 4 operators can appear to be 40, and why sometimes the best attack is the one that never seems to happen. As she taught, Ashley felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since before Blackwater. This was her new mission, ensuring that the Ghost legacy continued, that America would always have warriors willing to walk in the shadows. The phone in her pocket buzzed with a message from Phantom 1. Your operational plan approved. Godspeed to 6. Ashley allowed herself a small smile. Somewhere soon, 4 ghosts would step into the darkness carrying a plan she'd created. They'd risk everything to eliminate a threat most people would never know existed. And if they succeeded, no one would ever know their names. That was the Ghost way. That was her way. As the morning sun climbed higher over Fort Bragg, Ashley Walker continued teaching. Her body broken, but her spirit unbroken. Her past hidden, but her purpose clear. She was a ghost, and ghosts never truly die. They just fade into the shadows, waiting for the moment when America needs the impossible to become possible once more. Ashley Walker's story reminds us that true strength often comes in unexpected packages. The quiet supply clerk who endured mockery and harassment without complaint turned out to be one of America's most elite warriors, a ghost who had sacrificed everything in service to her country. Her broken body, held together by titanium and determination, carried secrets and scars that her tormentors couldn't imagine. This story teaches us never to judge others by their appearance or current position. The person serving your coffee might be a veteran who's seen unspeakable combat. The janitor cleaning your office might have once made split-second decisions that saved hundreds of lives. Every uniform, regardless of the role it represents, deserves respect because we never know the full story of the person wearing it. But perhaps the most profound lesson is about the nature of true service. Ashley didn't want recognition, medals, or glory. She wanted to serve quietly, to count boxes and support the mission from the shadows. Real heroes don't advertise their heroism, they carry their burden silently, finding meaning not in accolades, but in the knowledge that their sacrifice allowed others to come home.